we take and process all types of medical waste, from just general red bag, gauze, tissues, including sharps and syringes, all the way to more exotic chemicals like pharmaceutical wastes and pathological waste that may need to be disposed of as well.
Welcome to the Business of Healthcare podcast from the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management at the Naveen Jindal School of Management. Here at the University of Texas at Dallas, we bring together business leaders and other forward thinkers to discuss how best to meet the challenges of a rapidly changing, increasingly complex healthcare ecosystem. I'm Dr. Bob Kaiser, Director of the Master's Program in Healthcare Leadership and Management. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app to ensure you don't miss any of the future episodes. You can also join us online at businessofhealthcarepodcast.com. Today, we have our virtual visit in the windy city of Chicago with Jim Anderson, Vice President of Product Management, Strategy, and Innovation at Stericycle. If you work in healthcare, you know about Stericycle. They are a worldwide organization that deals with medical waste. More on that in the podcast. So welcome, Jim, to the Business of Healthcare podcast.
Thank you, Bob. Happy to be with you.
Well, in today's world, there's a major focus on the environment. And the environmental focus, it's worldwide, and it covers all topics from ocean pollution, air quality, ecosystem sustainability. We're all teaching generations to recycle and conserve our natural resources. But Jim, most of our audience, they do not know much about medical waste business. So let's get them up to speed on the basics. So our goal today is to bring awareness to this mission critical service. So start off here and give us a high level overview about the business of Stericycle. We know it's a significant component of the business of healthcare.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we are the industry leader in medical waste here in the U.S., and we take and process all types of medical waste, from just general red bag, gauze, tissues, including sharps and syringes, all the way to more exotic chemicals like pharmaceutical wastes and pathological waste that may need to be disposed of as well. But we run the whole gambit and treat customers wherever they are throughout the U.S. and the world.
Well, you know, when you stop and think about the size of companies that might be generating medical waste, do you deal with the smallest and the largest? Is there a segment of the market that Stericycle focuses on?
We treat all ends of the market. So our biggest market for sure is the hospital space. That's where the highest volumes are generated at also fewer points of generation as well. But we also have a business that goes after mom and pop doctors' offices, national and local pharmacies, really anywhere that waste is generated, which tends to be at the site of care. That's where we are.
Okay, I mentioned in the opening comments that you're also in charge of strategy. So we recently concluded our executive ed strategy class at the University of Texas, Dallas for our healthcare leaders. And nobody knew what strategy was, so we tried to get them up to speed on that. So we define strategy as winning, beating the competition. And we told them you can do this two ways. You can accomplish this by doing something entirely new or by doing something similar, but quite differently. For example, the airlines, they all compete. Some just do it differently. They have a strategy. Is your industry a growth, complicated, strategic market, or is it pretty much block and tackle?
Well, there is a fair amount of strategy that goes into it. However, when you think about the medical waste industry, it is more mature than, say, the technological space. So there are varying degrees of strategy for the industries that you play in, but there is a heck of a lot of strategy that goes into medical waste. So as we particularly think about, how do you compete? How do you win? We think a lot about what end markets do we want to have exposure to? What are the customers we want to serve and the associated call points with them? But then we also think about how can we deliver service better than anyone else can? And, not just be on par with them, with our competitors, but also deliver world-class service. So we do that through our network. We have an unparalleled network of plants and trucks and people that are in the hospitals every day collecting medical waste, transporting it to our centralized facilities and treating it for end disposal. We also deliver educational service. This is a highly regulated industry at the federal, state, and local level. So we also provide regulatory expertise to our customers to navigate that landscape. And we believe we do so better than anyone else.
The word regulation, is that a key component of managing and dealing with? Is the government involved in a big way, or do they let individuals manage it on their own?
The government is involved in a very big way at the federal, national level, as well as the local and state level. So at the federal level, the general regime of regulation is primarily through OSHA, protecting workers and occupational health and safety, as well as the Department of Transportation, because you need to be able to move and transport this waste from the site of care to a centralized plant for disposal. Then at the state level, varying state by state, there may be local regulations for how do you treat waste? Can you autoclave it, which is one technology? Do you need to incinerate it? Could it be treated as solid waste, which is the regular garbage? So there's tremendous variation at the state level. And then even there could be local ordinances you need to pay attention to. So we work to help our customers navigate that landscape, but then also let them know what the best practice is. So though you might be in one region or an area where something might be legal based on that regulatory location, however, it may not be the best practice for the industry. And we also inform our customers of that.
So from state to state to state, are the rules the same, or would a state out in the western region have a different approach because they have a lot of land to stash stuff, or is it uniform across from state to state?
There are general themes. So in general, your sharps waste, those are like your syringes, those do need to be autoclaved and disposed of in a landfill. Things like pharmaceutical waste, that does tend to be incinerated to keep the waste out of the waterways, and other safety aspects of that waste that could be created if it's treated improperly. So there are general norms nationwide, but state by state, they do vary.
Okay. So let's talk about technology a little bit. You've mentioned a variety of things. Sharps, that's what we call needles, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of things made out of glass. There's all types of different waste, which I'm not familiar with. How does it get processed? What is the end destination for waste that you deal with? How's it finally put back to where it needs to be put back to?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it might be worth starting out, where do we pick it up from? So typically medical waste is collected at its site of care, whether that's a sharps container or a biohazardous waste container. Healthcare facilities will then separate the waste that they have based on guidelines that they have from Stericycle and other state and local requirements. That waste is then packaged, labeled based on guidelines set by the DOT and state requirements, and stored on site until Stericycle pickup is scheduled. And then once a Stericycle driver arrives on site, they will pick up the waste, transport it to a centralized Stericycle facility. And then once at this centralized facility, we generally use a process called autoclave, which uses temperature, pressure, and time to render waste non-infectious. And then that ends up going into a landfill. And then to a lesser degree, we do use incineration for wastes like pathological waste and non-hazardous pharmaceuticals that represent a different risk to the environment.
So it sounds like there's quite a supply chain of stakeholders involved, starting with the people that are generating the waste. Is there an educational process that you have to go through in order to take somebody on as a client? Do you have to get them qualified, so to speak, in order to participate in your overall supply chain?
Absolutely. So there is education, training, and guidelines that meet a minimum threshold for our service. But then we also offer trainings that go deeper as value-added services in the OSHA and the HIPAA spaces to make sure that workers, patients, and information is protected in the medical waste setting.
So when we stop and think about some of the changes that have taken place due to COVID, medical services have been changed. Primary care is being redefined with telemedicine. And if we think about how COVID might impact medical waste management, all of the primary protective equipment that people have, all of these nasal swabs that have been collected, and this has a novel virus on it. So what did Stericycle have to do to engage with this new novel waste material?
Yes, and in some ways, it's a blend of stuff that we know how to do in our core DNA. We help customers and societies navigate very complex challenges, whether it's Hurricane Katrina, the H1N1 outbreak, Ebola. We've been at the center of all of it. So at our core, we know how to respond to emergencies. But specifically, what makes COVID different is how decentralized it is. Normally, when we're delivering services for the healthcare industry, it takes place at a hospital or it's a set location. With COVID, there were pop-ups going up in local gymnasiums, the Javits Center and McCormick Place in New York and Chicago, respectively, local schools and parking lots. One day we're empty and the next you were being able to get a COVID test or a COVID shot. And so we had to very rapidly be flexible and nimble to respond to that challenge, to be able to get our drivers to the right site, to be able to pick up the waste, to be able to coordinate with our point of contacts to understand what their volumes might be, to make sure that we're providing the right service in terms of frequency, container size, to be able to meet the volumes and demand and flexibility that those locations required.
This episode is brought to you by the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management, the definitive resource for healthcare management education in North Texas. The center is based in the Naveen Jindal School of Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. It plays a unique role in training the next generation of healthcare leaders to meet local, regional, and national demands. The Jindal School uses its strengths in accounting, administration, finance, marketing, and information systems to educate highly qualified personnel for healthcare administration and executive leadership positions. The center is home to 7 healthcare leadership and management programs, including undergraduate and graduate programs, as well as executive programs for physicians and working professionals. For more information, visit us online at jindal.utdallas.edu/healthcare.
We've been trying to educate people how to separate what they call their trash into recyclable and the other, which would be disposable. We've been trying to educate people along that line, and the new generations now are taking it very seriously. I'm a baby boomer. We didn't take it seriously enough growing up, but we are now. But I'm trying to think of the personal involvement. If you go down to a lake or you go to a park and you see all of these N95 masks laying around and things like that, is there any type of consumer education to get people to be responsible about that? Do you deal with that level of waste where it's irresponsible behavior by the individual?
Yes, we do. And that's actually how Stericycle was born. We were born out of the late 80s needle epidemic where syringes were washing up on the Jersey Shore. I believe there's even one of the Billy Jungle songs, "We Didn't Start the Fire," actually mentions that. So that was really how Stericycle in the med waste industry was born. And so we're very conscious of local communities and individuals, even if they don't think that they should be exposed, are around needles, and making sure that that actually happens. The healthcare industry generates a lot of waste, and there are significant environmental impacts if it's not handled properly. So, for example, you mentioned waterways. If pharmaceutical waste is flushed down the drain or just thrown in the trash, harmful chemicals could enter waterways or leach into surrounding environments. Likewise, in the healthcare industry, single-use plastics are used a lot in healthcare, but it's possible to rethink our reliance on plastics and single-use plastics, which is why, for example, we developed a reusable sharps container that can be washed up to 600 times. So every time you need a new container, you can use one that already exists as opposed to using new plastic that will make itself back into a landfill.
Okay, let's leave the United States for a few minutes and let's look at the rest of the world. Stericycle operates outside the United States?
Yeah, that's correct. We have our next biggest presence is in Canada, followed by a presence in the UK and Ireland. And we also have a presence in smaller presence in other countries as well.
Well, in the news today, we see a lot of supply chain issues. We also see a lot of negotiations with labor unions and a shortage of workers and things of that nature. We see what happens when cargo backs up from outside the country and it takes a long time to get it back in place. All the resources in that supply chain are typically challenged. In the waste management business, is that a unionized business as well?
It's generally not, but we do face a lot of those similar challenges that you outlined in the supply chain, whether it's lead times for new equipment, new trucks, new containers for medical waste, or just general labor shortages. there aren't a lot of people entering the workforce to become a driver. And that's by far the largest segment of folks that we employ, drivers that are able to get to sites of care to be able to pick up medical waste. So we're constantly looking for ways to attract, recruit, and retain drivers, as well as make sure that we're using the most efficient use of our labor.
So safety is always a concern, whether it's a Boeing airplane that has an issue for controls, or whether it's a car that has a battery that might burn up. What can go wrong? What are the big safety concerns that you have to think about in medical waste? Is it a biopharma, something going wrong, or what's the risk factor? Help us understand that a little bit. Put our minds at ease, if you would, or scare us to death. Either way.
No, definitely putting your mind at ease. As you think about the work that Stericycle does, we're in the business of moving, treating, and disposing waste. And in each step along that path, there is a risk that you could be injured in doing so. So Stericycle is constantly investing in our plants to make sure that we are putting the safest, best practices in place, the right standard operating procedures, and the right equipment to mitigate against that risk. Since 2019, pre-COVID, our total recordable incident rate, which is our internal measure of accidents, is down 21%. Our lost work injury rate is also down 25% compared to that pre-COVID 2019 benchmark. And then in terms of our vehicle incident rate of having accidents with our vehicles and fleet, that's down 33% since COVID.
Wow, that's great quality improvement. That's a great scorecard on that. Well, today's world with social media, with everybody using Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, et cetera, if something does go wrong, it seems like everybody will find out about it. I love the reference that you had to "We Didn't Start the Fire" with Billy Joel. That's one of my favorite songs. And, Needles on the Jersey Shore. Things like that are very visceral, palpable, tangible. People see and think of that, and it really gets their attention. So I'm glad that we've got a system in place in this country to deal with this. Jim, this has been a very educational episode for us. Where do you think the trend is for waste management? Is it growing? Is it growing significantly? Do you continue to see technological improvement?
So it is a fairly mature industry. So we are growing, but maybe not as rapidly or as staggering as some medtech customers that you may interview. But we are a growing industry, though it is more mature. Where we see innovation and being able to grow faster than market is in around technology. Healthcare is a very dynamic industry. It's constantly changing as there are new modalities, treatments, and technologies that are discovered. So we need to be adaptable to be where the puck is moving, not where the puck is. As I think about the lasting impact of COVID, in my opinion, it's really about accelerating trends that existed before COVID took place, like the shifting of care outside of the hospital into non-acute settings, from the non-acute settings into the home, and making sure that we're able to offer services in all of those locations, wherever they may be, as that changes. And if you think about the waste industry, you're picking up waste from a location. They're either generating a high volume of waste or a lower volume of waste. They've got a bigger container or a smaller container. And then you also have service frequency. So making sure that you're optimizing all of those dynamically as the market changes, that's a big opportunity for us, and being closer to our customers.
And I'm sure as you're going in to take stuff out, you could be dropping stuff off too. So that market could be incredibly different going forward. So
absolutely. We're constantly looking at our adjacent verticals and where we can expand into.
This has been a very interesting conversation with Jim Anderson, Vice President of Product Management, Strategy and Innovation at Stericycle. Jim, thanks for spending some time with us this afternoon and getting us up to speed on this medical waste. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Business of Healthcare podcast. To learn more about the Center for Healthcare Leadership and Management, go to jindal.utdallas.edu/healthcare.